Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. This week, we have on our panel Whalen.
Hi, everybody. I'm Whalen. I run the greatest DevOps as a service company nobody's ever heard of, Fuzzy Logic. We keep your app running on Black Friday.
Nice. Scott Nixon.
Hey, this is Scott Nixon from Cloud Mechanics, also a DevOps shop. That's all I got on that.
Nice. I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. I play a DevOps guy. I'm the CEO of devchat.tv, so I do all the jobs we don't have people for, and that's one of them. So that I am the DevOps guy here. We also have a special guest this week, and that's Ashar from Blameless. Ashar, do you want to introduce yourself? Let people know who you are, why you're famous.
Famous. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashar Rizqi. I'm one of the co-founders here at a company called Blameless, where our vision is to help companies move fast without breaking. And why am I famous? Well, there was the bunch of albums that I released in the last couple decades, all that other stuff.
I love the way you just totally owned that.
I wish I had that level of fame, but I would say if there was anything that I was infamous for, it would be within my internal networks for a lot of the bad, very nasty outages and kind of dealing with those. So,
yeah. When I talked to the folks at Blameless, we had a long conversation about what reliability meant, and then we talked a whole bunch about what do you do when crap goes wrong, right? Because things are just going to slide off the shelf or go down in a flaming pile of something. And it sounded like a lot of what Blameless does and a lot of what you folks talk about a lot is just when that happens, does everybody know what to do? Do we know who the stakeholders are? Do we know where we're going with this? How do we make sure that we're handling it properly? And how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? And I'm like, yeah, everybody needs a little of that. So how do you folks approach this? How do you look at this problem of making things reliable, and then when it's unreliable, making sure that it becomes more reliable?
Yeah, great. This is I guess this is where we go into therapy here a little bit. So I'll back up and I'll share a few anecdotes.
I'm going to lean my chair back. I'll tell you about my mother and no, go ahead.
I'll slip my mother into one of these for sure. I worked at two very successful cloud companies, and both had very different cultures. And at the end of the day, I mean, we can talk all day about like how you got to set up your systems and your processes and internal tools you got to have around reducing MTTR and like all these different types of metrics. But I like to take
I'm not familiar with that term. What is MTTR?
MTTR stands for mean time to recovery. How long does it take you to recover from the actual incident that you're in? It's a very common metric that gets used in today's day and age. My point that I was trying to make is that you got to start with the culture first, right? So these two companies were very different cultures. You had this culture of psychological safety and then psychological unsafety. So think about when you're in an incident where something bad happens, like you're already there's this negative energy that's there. And it just becomes so easy for human emotions to derail and start pointing fingers and self-protective behavior and hiding data and evidence and all that kind of stuff. And, what I like to talk about or like to encourage people is to really, really question at the highest levels within your team or your company, whatever you're doing, is like, do I have psychological safety? Am I giving people within my company the ability to make mistakes? Is this incident okay? And the answer should always be yes, every incident is okay. It's because it's an opportunity for us to learn. And it starts there, and then it goes into, okay, now that we have this culture, we have this, blameless culture is one word for it, but we have this culture where we allow people to make mistakes, and it's okay to have these incidents. As a human being, as an individual, it's okay for me to be involved in something that's so high stress. How do we actually recover from this as quickly as possible? Do we have the right tools in place? Do we have the right people and the right run books and all of these other things in place? And that's kind of where, you have systems or companies like PagerDuty that really help with, helping you notify and getting notified and escalated to as quickly as possible. Okay, now that the escalation has happened, what is it that we're actually looking at? And, what do we need to talk to? I need to let the executive team know. I need to let my customers know. All of that kind of starts to fall into place. And, we've had decades of experience and learnings from other industries like, fire services and emergency responders in healthcare that we can actually learn from and apply. So that was kind of my long way of coming and saying, like, yes, you should have tools and process in place, but the first thing you really got to focus on is I got to create an environment of safety where people really can focus on the problem and help resolve that problem. And one thing that I'd say about what we do at Blameless is, we're shifting the blame from individuals into a system. Like, that's the best thing that you can have is like, hey, it's always the system's fault. It's not any individual team's fault. So you can think of us as the system where we're just here to absorb all the blame.
Excellent. That is something that I have seen in the very highest performing SRE organizations. Is you don't want to slap the hand of the person that's running the system, because then they're incentivized to not give you the full story. But if you as you said, if you create a culture of safety and you shift the blame from the individual to the system, you get a much more honest and clear picture of what went wrong, and that enables leadership, whether it's the line manager or even the individual engineer, all the way on up to the C levels. That gives them the tools they need to fix the system, which is really what we're trying to do. There's the old anecdote of the junior engineer presses the big red button and it causes a $2 million loss, and the line manager's like, oh, we should fire the junior engineer, and the C level, the wizened C level comes down and says, why would we do that? We just spent $2 million training him.
My question is who put the big red button there?
Exactly.
There you go. That's exactly the question to ask.
The other question I have is what if it really is somebody's fault?
Well, but the whole thing is we're hopefully making changes at small enough levels that it's manageable, and that you can roll those kinds of things back, and you're supposed to build the systems in such a way that there's lots of things that are helping prevent those things as much as possible.
Right, that's the reliability part. Yeah. I guess the question I have is, I've seen companies that try to do this, but there's one person that's responsible for like 75% of the issues. They're just not paying attention. They're being a little bit reckless. You can boil most of the problems down to this one person being around. So do you continue Blameless or do you get rid of them?
I think, and Ashar, please, you're the expert in this field. Feel free to chime in, but I think that's rarer than people would intuit, basically.
Yeah, it's rare, but it does happen.
Of course it does. But I don't think anybody goes into a job saying, how much chaos can I create? Aside from things like industrial espionage, which does happen. But I'd say that if there is a consistent pattern of this one person keeps elbowing the big red button even after we've raised it above head height, that might be time for a personal improvement plan or other disciplinary actions. But for the occasional just chaos and running the machine, I think it's safe to assume good intent.
I couldn't agree more. It's very rare. I mean, what I tell people is that assume, like you said, assume good intent. When someone is being malicious, you'll know. And that's a good situation to have in the sense that it's very clear. You're like, okay, we got to get rid of this person. But in 9 out of 10 cases, in almost all cases, it's very rare that there's one individual that is out to get, like creating this chaos intentionally or, and if that's happening, you're actually going to see leading indicators in other parts of how they're interacting with the team. You're going to have folks that are going to be left and right come in and be like, hey, it's really hard to work with this person. You got to do something about it. It's going to end up leading to this performance plan, and for this person likely being phased out of that particular team.
Yeah, I agree. I just know that somebody has it going through their head. Yeah, but what if it's somebody's fault? And I agree with your assessments here. It is pretty rare. The other thing is that to what Ashar said, most of the time when there is one problem person, I mean, they could be the most talented person on your team, but if they're a real problem, then yeah, you'll get it from the rest of your team. And even if you don't, when they take that person aside, you're not violating this system of trust that we're talking about here, where people are trying to hide stuff because they know that that person should be gone, right? They're actually sitting there going, why didn't you get rid of them sooner? But yeah, for most of the rest of folks, give them the benefit of the doubt, train them, do your part to make sure that at the end of the day, they're willing to collaborate on the solution as opposed to try and cover the rear end.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, that was a great podcast, everybody. See you next time.
Yeah,
we're all in agreement. No debates.
Right. So the thing that I get to with a lot of this, though, is, and this is something that I've been working on in my own company, even outside of DevOps, is stuff is going to go wrong. So what do you do when it goes wrong? You have nobody's covering up anymore. Now what?
Step number one, stay calm. Don't panic. Things, as human beings, here's kind of what I've seen and what I've actually personally experienced is like, especially for folks that really genuinely care. Like if you really care, about what you do, about the company that you're in, about what you're building, you are going to take stuff upon yourself, right? So it's really important to see that pattern, know that you're kind of going into that mindset, and then stop yourself and say, okay, stay calm. It's fine. We're gonna, everything's gonna be all right, right? Do I have the right team around me to help support me and help me get back to things being normal? Do I have the right, organizational support? Do I have the right executive level support? A lot of those things, it's always important to kind of remind yourself that you are in a protected environment. You are surrounded by folks that care equally as much as you do. And then once you're sort of in that mindset, you have that clarity. It's all about, okay, like how do we get back to what is the known good state, the last known good state? And how do we get to that good state as quickly as possible? That is the only singular focus when things do go wrong in that initial part. And we'll talk a little bit more about, okay, how do you prevent this from happening again? But the initial focus is get back to a good state as quickly as possible, stabilize the situation, assess the situation, stabilize the situation, and then go on from there, right? And that requires having some pieces in place, individuals in place, having a commander who's responsible for sort of orchestrating everything together, having someone who's responsible for the actual subject matter expert that's going to go, has enough knowledge and expertise to go and understand and resolve the issue, having access to tools where you can actually pull additional support in from people internally, externally, and keeping everybody informed around this whole process, right? So,
yeah, I have an analogy to that. So this guy I know, he was up on his father-in-law's roof, working on the roof, and he got on the ladder, and the ladder wasn't well anchored, and it slid out from under him, and he broke his arm. And so the first thing is he's not going to go back up on the roof and start roofing again. He's going to get his arm better first. That's the main focus. And then next time he gets on the roof, he's going to make sure that the ladder's well anchored. Right?
Right.
Exactly. It really hurts to fall off the roof.
It hurts. Yep.
I think we lost our thread there.
I think somebody else was talking.
Yeah, go for it.
What I was going to say is that, imagine falling from that roof the second time, and then the third time, and the fourth time.
Right.
There's not only your body that's being damaged, but you've got your ego, hopefully, that's also being damaged. But then the medical bills that are piling up, right? All of that is very much applicable in sort of any scenario, in any company, in any sort of environment where you're not necessarily, if you don't have that culture of blamelessness and being able to learn from that issue and preventing it from happening again, well, it's going to happen again. It's going to hurt as much, if not more, and it's going to cost you so much more, right?
Yeah.
So, absolutely.
Well, the other thing is when I fell off when my friend fell off that roof, The other thing was nobody was asking who put the ladder up, right? So we weren't trying to cast blame. It was, hey, let's get to a doctor, right? And so it's the same approach there too.
Yep, exactly. I think it's a good analogy.
It's almost like there's multiple distinct phases when you're dealing with an incident. You want to triage the incident, then you want to mitigate the incident, resolve it, and then have an official close or retrospective where things like your process improvement documentation are modified as needed.
Yeah, I like that. And the thing is when you're talking about the process, it's not just the process of how do we develop the software, how do we deploy the software, how do we make sure that our backups are running, or whatever redundancies we're talking about here with reliability, right? It's also the process of what happens when something goes bad in the future. So we call these people, we pull in these people, we communicate in these ways, we go check on these particular things, go look in the logs, and that way we're already moving forward because everybody knows what their part is in the procedure when things go sour.
Speaking of things going sour, one of the things, I got into a conversation with a group of folks at DevOps Boise, DevOps Days Boise, a couple of weeks ago, and one of the people asked the question, like, how do you come up with like an error budget? And Ashar, I was wondering if you had some suggestions on how you've come up with error budgets for teams.
Interesting. This is a really exciting concept. For folks that don't know, does everyone know what an error budget is? Or
I think you should just explain it.
I'll explain what an error budget is. So I'll start with the sort of technical explanation, but then I think the error budget concept is so intriguing because it applies not just to software, but it applies to your culture. So what I was reacting to in that question was like team error budget. Right? You didn't say error budget for my product or my software, which I think is fascinating, and I love hearing that. But I'll start with the technical explanation. Is that historically, I'm sure everybody here has heard of the term SLA, service level agreement, right? And I have a very strong aversion to the term SLA, and the reason why is because the person who has to shovel all the crap because of this arbitrary number that's been set by a sales guy and a lawyer in a room locked up somewhere, that's extremely painful, right? And it's one number, 99.9%, 99.99, that's supposed to represent all your systems coming together to represent reliability, right? And it's just not going to happen. It's not something, it's been around for decades. It just does not work, and it's just been a source of a lot of issues. So, Google came up with this concept of an SLO, service level objective. And they took it one step further and said, look, an SLA is an agreement that you put in a document somewhere that you're promising to your customers, but how do you actually keep those promises? And they started with this concept of an SLO. And the SLO has a few principles behind it. So principle number one is that there is never 100% of anything in this world, right? So why do we expect our systems to operate at this 100% level? There's no natural or unnatural system that has 100% availability all the time. Well, let's establish that fact. That's great. The other principle is that number should be representative of a pain point, right? So in the technical world, we say CPU utilization is really high. Well, does that mean that my checkouts are not happening or my users are happy? I don't really know, right? But if I see a drop in login requests, well, that's representative of my user, what my user is experiencing. So let's just focus on that. Forget about all the other stuff. And then the final principle here within this error budget, this concept of error budget comes from the fact that you don't have 100% of this thing, which means you have some level, some budget available to you that you can use to your pleasure. You can do whatever you want with that budget. What that means in today's DevOps world is that you say, okay, we have 40 minutes of downtime that we can tolerate. That's our error budget. And that means that I can continue to ship as fast as possible as long as I stay within that 40 minutes of error budget. And that error budget, the assumption there is that is completely related to your user's happiness. So that's really where the concept of error budget comes from. Now, that concept, again, applies to the team. Like, how many errors can I collectively as a team, have? Or how much error budget does my product have? At our company internally as a culture, we actually use that vernacular to talk to each other about trust. We're like, hey, I trust you a lot, and I'm going to give you a very large error budget to make mistakes. As a new employee that's coming in, you have 3 months to onboard. In that 3 months, I'm going to actually give you a very large error budget to experiment and make mistakes. But after that, the error budget is going to go down because we're tuning and learning time. So, I was kind of rambling about the error budget, wanted to give some explanation there, but the error budget concept is very much like a financial budget that you can use in your personal relationships, in your professional relationships, but more importantly, in establishing an objective way in which teams can say, okay, we're going to slow down because we've consumed all our error budget, and we're going to focus on reliability work, or we're going to speed up and innovate more and try and experiment with new things.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. A lot of what I think about around like the service level objectives oftentimes is, something like an e-commerce website, you want very, very little downtime with something like that. But if it's like a project management application, maybe you have a little more, maybe you have those 40 minutes. And obviously you want to define those 40 minutes over a month, a quarter, something like that. I know Google in their book, the SRE book that they wrote, one of the things they talked about was they would actually stop allowing. You could have the policy that you just stop shipping new features if you exceeded your budget for that time period. And so then for the rest of that quarter, no new features. So I thought that was really interesting take.
Yeah, that's a really interesting concept, and what we're seeing is in the market is this rapid adoption of this concept because a lot of folks feel the pain of not having an error budget, and so we're seeing this rapid adoption. And you're right, like we're seeing some really advanced practices come up around error budgets. Like, not only do I want to, as part of my error budget policy, I may actually decide to automatically block deployments from going out, right? And that team is no longer allowed to push any new features until they actually get their error budget back, which can take a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, however long, right? So it's a really, really cool, really advanced concept that's changing the way that I think teams are collaborating with each other, and more importantly, how teams are shipping software.
Well, and having that error budget attached to the service level objectives, you get C-level, director level sign off on these things. So it's very clear whenever, the site's down, and then they are able to see whenever they look at their reports on their weekly or monthly basis, hey, well, it was down, but hey, we still were within our budget. We've all agreed this is acceptable for our business. So.
Right. Yeah. And the other thing is it really does give people a chance to, okay, so next time I change the indexes on the database, I'm going to test it on my machine first. Or, and so you are giving people that room to move because those innovations are critical sometimes to the life of the business going forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is, it's not so much that you can't continue to develop, those new features, right? It's just maybe you're not shipping them. And then that maybe gives your team a little more time to make sure that they're like reviewing and writing plenty of tests so that this stuff, whenever it goes live, doesn't fall apart.
Ashar, when you're bringing this these new methodologies to companies, I mean, myself, Scott, Chuck, and I, we're all experienced. We've got full buy-in to this sort of thing. We've seen the kind of good they bring. When you bring this to a new organization, when you get pushback, how do you what would you say some of your common objections are to just saying, no, we're not going to immediately do this right now, and how would you move? How do you move past them?
It's a great question. We actually get this a lot, and not everybody has read the Google SRE book that encapsulates a lot of these concepts quite nicely. Majority of the world, especially larger companies that operate in this old world, actually are the ones that have a lot of challenge. It's because they haven't, their old practices, the legacy way of doing things is so ingrained that it's really hard to break away from that. I'll give you an example, right? So, in a lot of large companies, we have a dedicated function around, like there's 5 to 10 people and all their day job is to manage incidents and nothing else. And then you have teams that all their job is to corral people and do postmortems with them. And that's like their 9 to 5 day job and they do nothing else, right? So they're not even aware that there's this possibility that, the developers should be the ones that should be managing their own incidents and should be doing their own postmortems and should be the ones in charge of their services and products running in production. And so we spend a lot of time sort of at least showing them, how free, like through automation, through platforms, through like a lot of these tools like Terraform and, CI/CD platforms and, platforms like Blameless, it frees up their time so that they can go and focus on higher value initiatives. A lot of SRE teams, for example, they just have the title SRE, but what they're doing is they're still doing the same button pushing and lever crunching and all that kind of stuff. When we show them how their time, like we just freed up 70% of their time because their toil inside their work has gone away. Well, you can now use 70% of your time on doing much higher value work, maybe joining a product team and learning how to develop software. So the first thing is to kind of show them where they are, and I really hate using this word, and I apologize for using it, but in this maturity matrix or maturity model or maturity curve, whatever you want to call it, where do they stand? What are they losing out on? What are they missing out on? And this is what kind of the end state looks like, and how do you actually get to that end state? So kind of giving them that visibility, and more importantly, this is one other practice, like what I've experienced with, for example, DevOps is just don't call it DevOps. Don't talk about DevOps. Do it first. Make it a habit. Build these habits in. And eventually you realize that you're doing these practices. And that's something that I highly encourage people is like, start with one SLO. You don't even have to call it an SLO. Call it something else. We have companies that are so averse to the term SLA, SLO that they'll just call it something else, a critical service availability metric or whatever. But
KPI.
Yeah, or a KPI, exactly right. Just call it that. The activity, the work that's going to go into defining that is exactly the same, but now you're standardizing on it. And then later on, we'll come back and say, oh, by the way, what you just established is an SLO, and they kind of have this system they've made it their own, number one, and they're running with it, and they're starting to see that benefit themselves. So we spend a lot of time educating folks, showing them like kind of where they stand, but we're very mindful, we're very careful as to not shove these concepts and ideas down people's throats. Like the best way to get them to buy in is to actually show them and have them experience that themselves, and that takes time.
So one of the things I often think about in kind of this realm of kind of trying to bring practices in organizations is, so Warren Buffett's business partner, Charlie Munger, often talks about how powerful incentives are. And that's like always been a cornerstone of the way they've run their business. And if you look at a lot of these things where, if you have somebody else like cleaning up your mess, like you should fix your own bugs realistically. But if you have a team that's fixing bugs or writing postmortems, like they feel all the pain and you don't feel any of the pain from your own mistakes. And so you're just more likely, because you're not incentivized to make sure that your stuff isn't going to cause problems. And, and I think it's a really, really powerful thing. And especially, I think because you can, management is used to, looking at salespeople and making sure that they're aligning those incentives correctly. And so this is it's being able to do very similar things in a technology place where it's, you're making sure the incentives align with the people that are potentially in the place to bring systems down or also learn from their mistakes. I mean, I think that's one of the most powerful aspects of the postmortem is that you sit down and you learn what went wrong, and maybe then somebody else can come in and be like, hey, if you'd done this would have worked better. And it could be just like a huge light bulb moment for that person, because now they see this completely different way they could approach maybe the same problem. So that's just some thoughts.
I think it's interesting you bring that up the way you did, Scott. One thing that I run into, though, is that a lot of people don't really know where the problems are that they have. And so, you talk about these solutions, or Usher's talking about saving people 70% of their time. They don't realize they have that problem until you solve it for them. And so I'm wondering how you educate people that way and say, you're spending a ton of time here that you don't need to, and do it in such a way to where they actually do buy in. Because at the end, it's oh yeah, that saved us a bunch of time and we're getting all this other stuff done. But beforehand, it takes
one of the things that makes me think of is the organization measuring the developers' productivity? Like we've got 5 developers. Are we actually getting 3 or 4 or 5 developers worth of work? Or are we getting like 1 developer worth of work because we're doing all this other stuff? I know that's a big problem whenever organizations involve engineers in hiring processes, is it totally depletes their ability to do work because they're spending 4 and 10 and 20 hours a week doing interviews. So
yeah, I think that goes back to the other point that was made. I think Lee might have made that point where it was essentially, if you're measuring it, no matter what you call it, whether it's an SLO or a KPI or something else, then you're going to start managing to that.
Well, I think it's also important to choose the right thing to measure. It's so easy to grab metrics from everything from your base virtual machine or bare hardware to your application stack at any moment, that it's very easy to get buried in a flood of useless information, and then you're hit with analysis paralysis. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to figure out, okay, what is the stuff the business actually cares about? One thing that I point out frequently is why is a company alerting on CPU usage on a random VM at any time during in today? I would say that's 9 times out of 10 that's a useless metric, and it's much more important to measure something like API response time, or number of requests per API user, per minute or per second or what have you. And the overuse of CPU time is really going to be a secondary or tertiary effect to the thing that you actually care about.
Yeah, my one sentence way to kind of talk to restate what you're saying, Lee, is what's the point of measuring any metric if it doesn't change the way you run your business? It's just a fucking waste of time. Oh, sorry.
That's all good. But that's I have 2 things that I want to kind of get to, and one of them is directly related to this, and that is Lee, the reason that they're measuring it is because all they had to do was check a box in Nagios or something.
Oh,
right.
Absolutely. And so they set the alert because it didn't cost them anything, except for the time later on, when they're going and looking at all these metrics. All the important ones are mixed in with all the other ones. Yeah. And so how do you start identifying the things that you need to be paying attention to avoid some of these issues or outages later on? Is it a trial and error thing, or are there good guidelines for that?
One thing that we learned as we were working with a bunch of companies was that what we do, there's so much data that's just hard to quantify. I'll give you an example. What's the cost of an incident? Well, if you're an e-commerce provider and the application affected is your checkout application, for example, or your payments processing application, that's pretty straightforward, right? But we're now talking about a world in which we have hundreds, if not thousands, of applications per company, and they're all kind of interdependent on each other. That's one. How do you measure the sunk cost, the hard to measure cost? Like, how much time are my engineers that I'm paying gobs of money to develop and write all this code, how much time are they spending on not doing feature development, for example, or not shipping code, or not doing things that are value add to the business, for example, right? So if they're running into incidents, what is the cost of that incident from how much am I paying this person? How much time did they spend on that incident? Oh, and by the way, not just the incident, but everything that happens after that incident, the postmortem, and all the activity around collecting the data and collaborating with everyone and putting all that together. Those are costs that are hard to measure. And what we found is that when we were able to quantify that just changed the whole landscape, the whole game, because they're like, wow, this is data. These are costs that we know exist. It's like kind of, black matter. We know it's there. We just can't see it, can't really provide any evidence of it, but when we get it, it's like game changing for us. And that's really speaking to the points that Scott and Lee were making around being able to what are these KPIs that we want to bubble up and use that to drive some sort of behavioral change in the enterprise. And I think the other point that I want to make here very quickly is that data already is living inside your company somewhere, inside your business somewhere. It's just a matter of being able to access it and reason from it. A lot of times we recommend folks to hire, data engineers to come in and just try to corral that data and really try and figure out where is that cost going? How inefficient is it my business?
Yeah, and that speaks to the other point that I wanted to get to. I've been reading the book Good to Great by Jim Collins. And, it's more of a business book, but the chapter that I've been reading is the one about having the right people on the bus. And so that's the other question that I'm driving at or thinking about is, maybe you don't have people that are problems. Maybe you have the right people, or maybe you need to get more of the right people involved in the process, or hire the right people to be involved in the process. So how do you go about finding those people and identifying those people that are going to come in and make things move forward in the way that you want?
Yeah. So one of the things, it's funny that you bring up that Jim Collins book, because I don't remember it covers like maybe 16 companies or something like that, but a huge number of them have totally just like tanked. And I'm going to use that to make an example of something I actually shared. In the last 15 years, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies have disappeared from the Fortune 500. And so it's very clear that that was actually as of 2015, but it just shows you how super competitive business is and how fast things change. And if you're not really staying on top of processes and constantly really investing in systems and the way you improve on the way you execute, how quickly you can just disappear.
Yeah, that's true. I think it is. I think it's a mix though of the process and improvement and all of those things. And you have to have people that are willing to do that. And I think that's another element. I think there are elements of company culture and, who the leaders are. And, there are a lot of things that go into it. And so, what are these aspects that are going to matter? But yeah, I think your point is well made that, there are processes and, that desire to do better that go into a lot of this stuff.
Yeah. I wanted to quickly add to that is do better has to mean something to the business, right? It can't, of course, in principle and practice, we all agree we've got to do better, but it's you got to turn that better into something meaningful. And the two axes that, are very simple to understand is, you've got reliability and then you've got velocity. So how do we get better on those two axes? And those two are at the very 50,000 foot level, probably two of the most important things for our company to succeed. So that do better has to be, working towards optimizing the line across those two axes.
Yeah, I love that. Love the example. It's really, really enjoy it. Yeah.
Yeah. One question I have though is, are there certain best practices? So when something goes down, are there certain best practices that everyone should follow? Because we've kind of talked about, what we're measuring, what we're looking at, and how we move forward and doing the postmortems. But should there be a central place for people to put all the information? Do you want to have one person coordinating the look into what's broken and how do we fix it, and then how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? Or am I totally off base with some of these assumptions of things that you're going to want to do?
No, I think there's different. The biggest factor in what you're talking about, Chuck, here is the culture. It has to map to what people feel that they're comfortable doing internally. Are you a Spotify type culture? Are you a Netflix type culture? Are you whatever? That really factors into this. And what I mean by that is, you may be a large company, a Fortune 500, very large company, and your culture is that of, hey, I want to be able to kind of create, and I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing, but silos and create like focus groups and have those focus groups solve that particular problem. So for example, I could have 5 people that we hire that are purely responsible for, because we care so much about postmortems, making sure that postmortems get scheduled and done on time, and those action items get captured and stored in some system somewhere, and this team is following up on that. Or you could have a culture internally where you don't believe in having these kind of focused silos, and you really feel strongly that the ownership and the responsibility falls on, for example, the developer, and they're responsible for doing that. But you got to have that. You got to be tuned into what that culture is, and whatever process you're designing, whatever thing, it needs to kind of tune into that, right? And I think there's no point in doing postmortems and action items. Just a lot of what we found, for example, is companies will do them to check a box, right? So they're kind of useless. You're just doing them because you're saying that, hey, we have a culture of blameless postmortems, and we learn from that. But why are you running into those same issues again, right? It is important to treat that as a first-class citizen, have buy-in from the top to say, hey, we are going to prioritize time in our sprints and how we do work to actually address a lot of these follow-up action items, right? And quite honestly, sometimes that leads to some anti-patterns, but you're still making some forward progress in that domain. So tune into that culture, create, have some ownership around it, whether that ownership is on an individual embedded in a team or a centralized team. Those are perfectly fine models. And then follow through. That commitment from the top is extremely important to make that happen.
Nice.
Yeah, I like it. I mean, different organizations value different things. So that makes a ton of sense to me, that you work off of the things that your organization values to make sure that the right things are happening. And then you're discussing the process to make it better.
Yes.
It's goal setting. If you don't have a goal, then you can't succeed. But if you can't succeed, then it's almost a tautology that you must fail.
So, Ashar, is there anything else that you think it would be good for us to share or know about?
We talked about, there is one thing that I've been finding particularly fascinating is this whole concept of doing better from the start. And what I mean by that is, 2 things. One is where you have more and more of your typical software development lifecycle functions that are moving to the left, right? So developers are owning more of their services in production, owning more of the security posture, owning more of quality, and so on and so forth. That's pretty interesting. It's a pretty interesting trend. And it's happening because of open source and tooling and all that stuff. And then the second thing that I find really interesting is, how do you prevent issues or have more control over the reliability and of things going out, right? And you'll hear things like resilience engineering and chaos engineering, which I think are buzzwords at this point, and there is definitely need to some of those practices. But conceptually, at a very high level, how do you set yourself up so that you're not always in this reactive mode, but you're actually much more proactive as your software is going out, especially in this DevOps world, to maybe not prevent issues from happening completely, but have more control over them so that you can react faster and roll things back if needed, and so on. So I think that's a really fascinating and interesting sort of concept that's coming up, which is, what I think people are calling resilience engineering. That's the other thing. And then the question I would have for folks is, who takes responsibility for that? Who actually does? Is it the SREs? Is it the DevOps folks? And how do you structure your organization to actually start doing more of that? That's a pretty open question, Wild West right now.
So what do you think is, where do you think we're headed with a lot of these SRE? Do you just see increased adoption? Do you see big changes to the way people, kind of run SRE in organizations? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, I definitely would say that people are changing the way that they operate, right? And, operating software is becoming increasingly more complex, which is forcing people to change the way that they work. One anti-pattern is that you change the title of the person, but you don't actually change their job or their job responsibilities, which is an extremely common, which is what we've seen with DevOps, quite frankly, right? You had the operations folks that were approving tickets and pushing buttons, and then you said, oh, we're going to be a DevOps organization, so we're going to change your title to DevOps, and all of our problems will go away. And that hasn't happened, obviously. And then it's the same thing that is a very common trap to fall into, even with SRE, which is like, oh, we already have these folks that are doing some kind of operational work. We're going to change their title to SRE, and suddenly we're going to become, an amazing SRE organization that practices these things. And I want to call that anti-pattern out because it's really easy to fall into. And if you find yourself doing it, just stop right there. What the healthy pattern is where, you have a healthy understanding of how much toil or how much effort is going into and is spread across your organization. How much toil exists on the DevOps team, or how much toil exists on this development team? And if we eliminated that toil, they get all this extra time back. Well, what are some high value things that they can actually focus on? One company that I worked at in my past history, we had 13 SREs, and all our job was to push buttons because we had elevated privileges in production, and that's all we were good for. And, we had access to all these graphs and metrics. So all we were doing all day was just pushing buttons. And it's not a healthy career to be in, to just be doing that and being treated that way, which is like the only time folks are coming to you is like, hey, you have elevated permissions. Can you sort of do X, Y, Z thing for me? And the transformational change that we made there is like, how do we actually take all that toil and start to transition that to the development teams? And then that SRE team started focusing on bringing in new types of technologies. We brought in next generation continuous delivery platform, next generation service discovery platforms. We brought in, we became sort of this consulting organization and more seen as more of a partner. And, that to me was a success story of how not only were the developers more empowered to do things and move things along, because that shift left phenomenon was happening where these developers were more responsible, but it didn't mean that the SREs lost their jobs. It meant that they now can do things that they've always wanted to do, or bring in new and exciting technology that's actually helping enable the business. So that's a healthy pattern. We've seen this across some other companies as well, and that's something that I highly encourage people to really reflect on and see. That's the pattern that I'm kind of falling into, the anti-pattern. How do I break out of it so that I can take advantage of the benefits that come from it?
Yeah, great. Totally.
I don't know. I want to change my dog's name to Rin Tin Tin and lower the crime rate in my neighborhood by doing so. I love that. You can change the title, but it's just, you actually have to do the work. And so many times we do the other thing and then we feel good about having done something, where in reality, we're not doing anything that's going to produce results.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because you run into this confusion where people will sometimes see DevOps as somebody who's, they're managing our email server or something like that. And for me, in my mind, DevOps is all about software delivery and working with software teams. And SRE, to me, in my mind, is kind of like this evolution from automating a lot of things, but also like massively changing, the organizational structure and, a lot of policies and, a lot of other things other than technology.
Yep. So Ashar, one question that I have, I mean, you started this company Blameless, and we haven't talked a ton about Blameless. We've talked a lot about SRE. You want to just tell us in like 1 or 2 minutes how Blameless fits into the conversation we just had?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Blameless, like I said, our vision here is to, how do we optimize reliability and velocity, right? It's not an either or. It's like, you got to do both. As a company to survive, you got to be reliable and you got to move fast and stay competitive, right? And this is a problem that a lot of companies don't even know that they can solve. So our platform, what we set out to do is to say, okay, how do we build the team that really comes in to help solve that problem is the SRE function. And that SRE function can be called production operations. It takes on multiple different names across the industry. But really, its sole focus is how do we optimize for speed and velocity? And so if you think about SRE and the different principles, you've got how do we resolve incidents as quickly as possible, learn from them so that they never happen again, set SLOs and have error budgets so that we have a way to reason reliability, and how do we manage change all the way from that thing. 80% of all issues are caused by change. Well, how do we manage change well so that number goes down? That's essentially what Blameless does, right? Like it's that end-to-end, platform for reliability engineering teams, for teams that really want to be able to move fast without slowing down, have control over their destiny, eliminate the toil across all those different domains, and be able to resolve incidents through automation and AI as quickly as possible, make doing postmortems super easy. So there's just no excuse not to do them. Right? We really focus on automation and eliminating 90% of the toil that goes into writing a postmortem, capturing follow-up action items, and then setting SLOs, creating error budgets, setting policies on them. We're not here to replace Datadog, New Relic, AppDynamics. You already have those systems. Those metrics are there. We're here to help you filter out the signal from the noise. And then from that, how do we drive meaningful change? How do we do change management, change orchestration in this new world so that things are not breaking as often or that you have more control over it, right? So it's a very high level sort of 30,000 foot view of what we do at Blameless and, kind of helping companies solve this important problem, this important realization that you gotta do both velocity, speed, as well as, reliability. Can't live without both of them, either one of them.
Yeah, businesses need the speed to really to stay competitive, because if you're not, moving fast and shipping stuff, you're just going to get lapped, surpassed by somebody else. So
exactly,
100%. And the other thing is, and Ashar kind of brought this up, you need the good information, and then you need a way to orchestrate it, and it sounds like it all kind of comes back together so that you can move in the right direction as fast as possible. So.
Yep.
Ashar, how would you describe an ideal customer for your product? It sounds like the Blameless product would be a good fit for a wide variety of companies. But I'm talking about who is the kind of company that when they sign up, you and your co-founders sit and say, "Ooh, these guys are going to be able to solve a ton of problems. We might even be able to get a baller testimonial out of this."
Yeah, great question. Something that we actually, and every company goes through this. They struggle through this as they grow up. For us, there's it's a function of size, function of their environment, their infrastructure, the tech stack that they're using, and it's a function of what does their internal culture look like? What does their internal organizational structure look like? And how important is reliability to them? So what that really maps to is like we have a min bar, which says if you're a company that's 300 employees, that's using Slack and Datadog and, has complex workloads, and you've got enough engineers on the team to where you struggle with collaborating and everybody kind of coming together, that's kind of the sweet spot for us, right? Where the pain is extremely apparent. And because of the complex systems, when issues happen, they're bad issues. And those issues must never happen again because they have such a deep impact to the company culture, to the company bottom line. And, but they're not, so big that they haven't, or so far away from SRE, so far away from DevOps that they just don't even have the basic tooling to take advantage of any of these things, right? So I would say there's a sweet spot in there, roughly. What I can tell you is customers or companies that really want to work with us but aren't necessarily ready are, much like smaller startups that are about 15, 20, 25, 30 people. They have this desire to do things the right way, but they don't necessarily have that complexity, or that pain point is not apparent at that size of company. In terms of industries where we've kind of had success, I would say e-commerce is one, because again, downtime equals dollars lost. Financial services is another one. Cloud providers that have SLAs that they're promising to their customers, SaaS providers, and so on. So those are kind of, when we see them kind of fall into these buckets and we're like, oh, check. We're like, wow, this company is really feeling this pain and we think they can benefit from what we have at Blameless.
Nice. Is there a company size or revenue model that that you would say would be too big to address right now?
I would say that companies, very large companies, and that have this culture of not built here. So they're averse to buying software from third parties is because they just have this culture of building stuff internally, because they have very strong engineering organizations.
Okay.
Google would be one of them. Not to say that they couldn't benefit from Blameless, but also because they're so advanced along in their maturity and process and technology that we're actually learning from them. I would say those types of companies are the ones that we would actually partner with them as thought leaders. Hey, let us take your learnings and show the rest of the world, versus, hey, here's how we can improve, or come in and you can kind of take advantage of that. So we've actually seen that across a lot of like Fortune 500 companies that are so big, they have so much money, they have this culture of building it internally. So they're going to say, hey, we're going to go and hire a bunch of engineers and keep this knowledge in-house and build our own internal systems.
Interesting. Okay. Well, Comcast probably wouldn't be the greatest referral.
Comcast is an interesting one. I think they're going through a little bit of a culture shift. It all depends on the culture. Where Comcast, I think, is moving more to this model of how do we these solved problems, why do we keep solving them over and over again? So I think there's a little bit of that culture shift happening where they're more amenable to talking to companies like us. But let's say you've got, I won't name them, but you've got a big financial services company. And they just have this culture of saying, you know what, we like this product, we like what we see, we're just going to go and build it in-house and kind of replicate that functionality.
Very interesting. All right.
Yeah, for this would be my advice to some smaller startups out there that are trying to target some of these big companies. It's always exciting to be like, oh wow, there's this big logo that wants to work with us, and that'll be game changing for us. And 9 times out of 10, it is a false alarm. It's a red herring. Like, avoid at all costs. When you are big enough, these companies will come to you, and you'll be ready to work with them. But really, I would say question what it is and why they want to. Are they really ready to take advantage of working with a small company?
Fair enough.
Very cool.
All right. Anything else we should jump on before we hit picks?
No, I don't have anything.
All right. Let's go ahead and do some picks then. Scott, do you want to start us out?
Sure. All right. So this week, because of kind of the nature of a lot of what we talked about, I figured a great pick to go along with this is, and this is if you're like kind of newer with mental models. Shane Paris from Farnham Street wrote a book called Great Mental Models. There's an Audible version, there's a hardback, all that. I think that's a great place to start if you're kind of new into mental models and you don't know about a lot of things like second order thinking, probabilistic thinking, those kinds of things. Would be inversion is another great one. That's a good place to start, and you can start out just by checking out the blog as well. So that's just fs.blog for Farnham Street blog. So
it's a great blog. I love that blog.
That's all I got.
Nice. Lee, what are your picks?
All right. My picks this week are around backup and restore. We will not go into the details, but I am very grateful for the Restic open source backup app and the Backblaze B2 storage model.
Nice.
Very nice. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. So one thing that I've been playing with lately, and I think it's somewhat germane to the show, is Azure Functions. So it's kind of like AWS Lambdas and things like that. the thing that I've been building in the Azure functions, and unfortunately the documentation really isn't great for the Azure functions, but I've talked to a number of people that work on Azure in various ways, and so I figured I could easily get help is more or less how I picked it. But I've been building something that will track podcast downloads. So the state of podcast statistics is very sad at the moment. I mean, you basically know when somebody downloads your episode generally, but that's about it. And so I'm looking at ways of making that better. But for right now, I'm just trying to get better numbers because the company that I've been using up till now, it's called Blueberry. You take the E's out of blueberry, the fruit, and that's how you spell them. The issue I've had there is that I've had basically drastic drops in the number of downloads they report, like overnight. It just drops off. And I talk to them and they essentially say, we changed our algorithm. Well, I'm tired of dealing with a black box that penalizes me for using it. So I decided to build one of my own. And I've been working on Podwrench, which is a podcasting system anyway. So anyway, it's cool stuff. If you want to get started with it, I highly, highly recommend the Visual Studio Code extension for Azure Functions. You do have to do a little bit of command line magic to get it all to work, but you can, if I'm on a Mac, so you can do it with Homebrew. And at this point, I've got it mostly to the point that I want it to, but I realized that I could do what I want to do with like 3 functions. And the one is just the HTTP endpoint that records the request. And then the other ones are essentially the ones that build the reports. So, every so often it'll just go in and it'll build out the report for, the day. And then the other function that I need is whenever there's a new line added to Cosmos DB, because I'm just using their built-in database because why the heck not? I have another Azure function that I've built or will be building that will do all the deduplication. So it'll look at it and say, is this a request for the same URL from the same user agent within 24 hours from the same IP address? And so, it'll look at everything that it knows about it, and then it'll use that to determine whether or not it thinks it's a duplicate download. Because some of them go in and they request different parts of the file. And so you'll get 5 requests for the same thing and it's the same download. And so that's what you're aiming to eliminate. But yeah, it's been pretty cool just playing with that and seeing what the cloud providers offer that way. And then I keep seeing a lot of the conversations about DevOps going more toward managing cloud resources as opposed to managing server resources. So anyway, that's my pick. Ashar, do you have some things you want to shout out about with us?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'm personally very passionate about, and a lot of folks, I think, experience this pain being operators on call, is they lose sleep. And you lose sleep in many different capacities at a company. So one book that I have really read and is near and dear to my heart is this book called Why We Sleep. And it's the Unlocking the Power of Sleep and Dreams. And it really is by this professor at UC Berkeley who's done extensive research on sleep physics and sleep, how it affects physiology and biology and the evolution of sleep over time. And I would highly recommend this book for folks that struggle with sleep and stress, particularly on-call engineers and if you're looking for a case to make to your bosses about, why on-call really sucks and why, how it's affecting people personally in their lives, like this book really provides a lot of insight into that. So I used to struggle a lot with sleep, and this book just helped me understand why, and it's made some big changes to my sleep habits and sleep patterns to help me get that sleep. So highly recommended for folks that, as I mentioned, especially for on-call engineers, and definitely a way to make a case to why things should be better, because it's really, that lack of sleep is really hurting you, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, I like that pick. I've done a lot over the years with trying to improve my sleep and using eye masks, and but I also have realized that if I go multiple days with like even slight sleep deprivation, like as little as like 5 or 6 hours of sleep, like I will literally be way more likely to be irritable and kind of cranky and stuff.
More likely to blame.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, I one last question, and I usually ask this before the picks, but I didn't. Ashar, if people want to see what you're working on these days or just follow you on social media, where do they go?
I'm available on LinkedIn. There's a lot of stuff that we'll be writing and posting on LinkedIn. It's Ashar Rizqi, ASHAR-RIZQI. That's my last name. Twitter, if you just search for Blameless HQ, you'll find a lot of stuff there. And of course, on the Blameless blog page, you'll see some really cool and exciting thoughts and leadership exercises that we've brought together from these DevOps and SRE leaders around the world. So blameless.com/blog.
Nice.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, this has been great. Really enjoyed this conversation. Let's go ahead and wrap this one up, and we'll have another episode for folks next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit